Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We are continuing with our reading of Iqbal's reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. And we had stopped here. We did a bit of these lines from here last time, but we'll go through them again. He felt, we're just going to start from here. By he means Ghazali failed to see that the thought and intuition are organically related. And that thought must necessarily simulate finitude. So even though it is not finite, it must behave in a manner in which a finite thing might behave because of its alliance with the serial time. Okay, so let's look at this a bit. So in Kant we have this distinction between reason and intuition. And reason then is further divided into understanding and reason in a more limited sense, which is different from understanding. And the basic difference between reason in this sense here and reason here, understanding, is that understanding deals with intuitions, while reason in this sense doesn't deal with intuition. So reason in this limited sense is either a faculty of inference, so its basic raw material is propositions or sentences, or it is a faculty of ideas, but those ideas, because we don't have any intuition of them, those ideas are mere speculation in a sense, and we can't say whether anything corresponds to those ideas. We can't say whether anything corresponds to those ideas. So understanding is related to intuition. So it takes in intuition, and intuition is the faculty of reception. So it gets information. So we get information. Intuition is sort of our eyes to the window to the world. Through our senses, we get information, and then understanding process that information. So that information first goes through the form of intuition, which is space and time. So that's provided by the mind, human mind, and then so in a sense that the world is not in space and time, but a mind is structured in such a way that it can't help but locate any information it gets through the world in space and time. And that's why we can't see the world as it is, because this information has to go through space and time, which are the forms of our human mind. And then this structured information, structured through the form of intuition, has to go through understanding, and understanding organizes this information in categories or concepts. So understanding in that sense is closely related to intuition, but understanding itself in Kantian concept doesn't provide us any intuition. It just organizes the intuition we get. And then understanding becomes the raw material for reason in the limited sense, reason as a faculty of inference. And reason in the limited sense it also produces ideas, but those ideas, we can't say whether they correspond to any reality, because at that level we don't have any intuitive faculties. But those ideas are important because they provide ideals to the reason in terms of which it further organizes the information we have at the level of understanding and at the level of reason as a faculty of inference. So in a sense, ideas help reason as a faculty of inference to further organize our information. So this is the background in which we should understand Iqbal's talk here. Let's go back to. So Ghazali failed to see that the thought and intuition are organically related. And that thought must necessarily simulate finitude and inconclusiveness because of its alliance with serial time. So let's get into that in light of what we just said. So thought and intuition are organically related, meaning that's basically in Kantian concept that intuition provides us information, and thought in terms of understanding organize that information. So in that sense, and this information has to go through the form of intuition which is space and time, and this form of intuition is obviously a structure of our mind, and understanding is also a structure of our mind, and that's what provides the so-called organic relationship between intuition and thought. And by thought is meaning reason. But the price to pay for that is that our thought become subservient to the structure of understanding, or subservient to the form of intuition, and the form of intuition is space and time. So our thought has to take everything in the context of space and time. So our thought has to simulate, he's saying, simulate in the sense that thought has to come to the level of understanding. And deal with this space and time, which are limitations put on thought, but these are the limitations put by, these are the limitations which are not inherent to thought, but only inherent to our understanding. Or what Iqbal is saying is, so our thought has to simulate this finitude, because it is dealing with information which is coming through space and time. So understanding has to simulate finitude and also inconclusiveness because of its alliance with serial time, space and time. But thought in its own, when it is not dealing with the information at the level of understanding, doesn't have to pretend that it is situated within a space and time. That's what he is saying. So but Kant had said that thought, when it doesn't deal with the space and time, is dealing with pure emptiness as far as information is concerned, because the ideas produced by reason at this level don't correspond to, or we can't know if they correspond to any reality or not. And since at that level we don't have any information, that's why if we apply it to the reality, then we involve ourselves into contradiction. But Hegel disagreed with Kant, and Iqbal is disagreeing with Kant as well. So the idea that thought is essentially finite. So the idea that thought is essentially finite, and for this reason unable to capture the infinite, is based on a mistaken notion of the movement of thought in knowledge. So basically what he's saying is that the idea that thought is, and let's read thought for reason, is essentially finite, is, and for this reason unable to capture infinite, is based on a mistaken notion of movement of thought in knowledge. Movement of thought in knowledge. Because Kant had said that in order to get knowledge, reason. So firstly, Kant didn't say that reason is finite. In fact, he said that it is in the power of reason to transgress any limits. So there is infinity built in reason, and that's what, and that is a dual, two-edged sword in a sense, because that infinity which is dormant in reason provides it with its freedom, with its speculative power, with its imaginative power, and that's infinity inbuilt in reason provide us with capacity to go beyond what is given. But if we don't self-discipline that freedom or that potential infinity, then reason is going to get us into trouble, in the sense that it might think that its ideas correspond to some sort of reality. But that would be a mistake, because those ideas are created by the freedom of reason itself, from within itself, and reason has no power to know whether those ideas correspond to reality. So in other sense, there's a price to pay for the freedom and infinity of reason and thought, and that price is that we have ideas, we have power of alternatives, imagination, infinite speculation, and so on. So that's the benefit of reason and the power of reason, the power of infinity within reason. And that power help us to organize our knowledge and even to, plan something new based on what we have. But the price we have to pay for this power, this infinity, this freedom, which we have at the level of reason, is that we have to accept that these are ideas, are speculation, whether they correspond to reality, whether they can be transformed into knowledge, is always going to remain an inconclusive question. Because in order to turn these ideas into knowledge, reason has to come down to the level of understanding, which means it has to deal with the so-called serial time, which means it has to limit itself. Okay, so that was Kant's position. But what Iqbal and Hegel are saying, that that's not a final position, and what they are basically challenging is Kant's insight the price to pay for the freedom of reason is to limit its application to knowledge. But what Hegel and Iqbal is saying is that we don't have to pay that price. That we can have our cake and eat it as well. That at the level of reason, we can have some sort of intuition, which is different from the intuition at the level of understanding, and that intuition is not bound by space and time, so it is not bound by finite, so that's why it can actually capture infinite. So that's Iqbal's point here, and that's essentially Hegel's point as well. And let's go back. So Ghazali failed to, and obviously we should remember how anachronistically he's reading Ghazali here. He's basically blaming him not to have anticipated Kant and Hegel. So he failed to see that thought and intuition are organically related in the sense in which we define them, and that thought must necessarily simulate finitude at the level of understanding and conclusiveness at the level of understanding because of its alliance with serial time through forms of intuition, as Kant had taught. And that's fine. But Kant's mistake was to stop there. In fact, we don't have to stop there, and the thought is not essentially finite. Okay, Kant didn't say that it is essentially finite, and for this reason unable to capture the infinite. Kant said it was unable to capture infinite because at the level of the limitlessness of thought, we don't have any intuition corresponding to reality. That's why it is unable to capture infinite. So but they are contesting that the idea that thought is essentially finite, and for this unable to capture the infinite is based on a mistaken notion of the movement of thought in knowledge. And this mistake is presumably that we claim that reason at the level of ideas has to have the same relationship with understanding, intuition as understanding has at the level of intuition. But in fact, at this level, reason doesn't have to have the same understanding with our intuition and its form, and it can deal with reality in a different mode, the mode which is taught by Hegel, for example. And I'm not saying that Iqbal would, exactly recommend the exact model, but that would provide him with a clue as to how reason can deal with infinite at its own proper level without dealing with intuition and its form. So that's what he's saying. So we're going to stop here, and we'll continue from here next time. Okay, thank you.